there's a list of American last names that keeps going viral. 20 surnames, they say, that secretly prove you have Native American ancestry. And almost everything about how those lists get used is wrong. Here is the tension nobody resolves. A surname on its own proves nothing. Millions of people carry these names with zero native ancestry. But a specific set of surnames, genuinely, are breadcrumbs. Real pointers into real records where native and mixed families were actually written down. So the truth sits in the uncomfortable middle. Your last name is not proof, and it is not nothing. It is a place to start digging if you know which names are real and where they actually lead. So here is what this video gives you. The surnames that carry a real documented trail. And more importantly, exactly how to check whether yours connects to a recorded person or whether the story you inherited is just a myth. Validate the belief, then crack it. Let us be fair to the belief first, because the impulse behind it is not foolish. A huge number of American families carry a real, half-remembered story of native ancestry. Wanting to know if it is true is a good instinct. The problem is how the internet answers it. The viral lists take common surnames, attach the word native to them, and let you feel confirmed. Some add the old markers: high cheekbones, dark hair, a certain look. We took that myth apart in our last video, so we will be quick here. Features are not evidence. High cheekbones appear on every continent, and a surname by itself is not evidence either, because names travel. They get adopted, changed, and passed to people with no blood connection at all. Here is the crack in it. The real version of this question was never about the name sounding native. It was about whether that name appears in a specific document, a roll, a register, a record where a real native or mixed family was counted. The surnames that matter are the ones with paper behind them. And there is one document that matters more than all the rest: the master key, the Dawes Rolls. If you have 5 tribes' ancestry, Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, or Seminole, proving it is not a matter of opinion or a look or a feeling. It comes down to a single set of ledgers called the Dawes Rolls. Between 1898 and 1907, a federal commission went through what was then Indian Territory and wrote down, by name, the members of those 5 nations. Each one recorded with a roll number, their age, their family, their blood quantum, and their tribe. By the time it closed, the commission had enrolled just over 100,000 people. And it did not simply list them, it sorted them into columns. By blood: intermarried white, freedmen. Those columns decided who counted as a citizen and who did not, and families fought bitterly over which one they were placed in, because the label the clerk chose would follow their descendants for the next 100 years. And here is the part that changes how you should think about your surname entirely. To this day, those 5 tribes use the Dawes Rolls as the basis for citizenship. If you want to enroll now, the requirement is simple to state and hard to fake. You must prove you descend from a specific person listed on those rolls. Read that again. For millions of people, am I really native is not a mystery at all. It is a lookup. Either your ancestor's name is in that ledger, traced down to you, or it is not, which means a surname is not the answer. A surname is the doorway. It tells you which ledger to open. So before we go through the names, you need to understand why the real ones almost never look the way people expect, why the real names are ordinary. When people imagine a native surname, they imagine something that sounds native, something translated from a tribal language. And a few names like that do exist, but most do not. And the reason is history. For 3 centuries, native families took on European surnames, from traders who married into the tribes, from missionaries who renamed converts, from the government clerks who assigned names during allotment. So by the time these families were written into the rolls, most of them were carrying ordinary English, Scottish, and Irish last names. Consider the single clearest example in Cherokee history. The principal chief who led the Cherokee Nation through its darkest years, including the Trail of Tears, was named John Ross. Ross, a Scottish surname. He was, by blood, only about 1/8 Cherokee, and he was the elected leader of the entire nation. Sit with what that means. If you had judged John Ross by his surname or his blood quantum, you would have missed the most important Cherokee leader of the 19th century. The name was never the ancestry. The name was a marker of where a family had been written into the record. And Ross was not the exception. Among the Chickasaw, the most powerful family of the early 1800s were the Colberts, the sons of a Scottish trader named James Logan Colbert, who had married into the nation. Levi and George Colbert helped steer the Chickasaw through treaty after treaty with the United States. Another Scottish surname sitting at the very center of another native nation. Once you see the pattern, it is everywhere. The leadership of these tribes was full of ordinary British last names, because that is simply how the families had been written down. So when we go through these surnames now, do not look for names that sound native. Look for names that carry a documented trail. Let us start with the community whose trail is the clearest. The Lumbee names. The largest group of native people east of the Mississippi are the Lumbee of Robeson County, North Carolina, and their surnames are among the best documented in the country. If your family is from that corner of the Carolinas and carries one of these names, you are looking at a real traceable connection. The most common Lumbee surname of all is Locklear, then Oxendine, Chavis, Lowry, sometimes spelled Lowry, Dial, Jacobs, Hunt. These are not names someone guessed. They are the names that fill the church registers, the county rolls, and the family lines of a documented native community that goes back centuries. Locklear alone is so common in Robeson County that it functions almost like a marker of the place itself. Take that name, Lowry. In the 1860s, a Lumbee man named Henry Berry Lowry led a decade-long armed resistance across the Robeson County swamps against the men seizing his people's land. He was never captured. His fate is unknown to this day. His surname, Lowry, is one of the names on this list. That is what a documented surname looks like from the inside. Not an exotic word. An ordinary name attached to a real, recorded life. And notice again, every one of these is an ordinary English-sounding surname. If you carried the name Locklear and went looking for something that sounded Indian, you would have walked right past your own ancestry. The trail was in the records the whole time, not in the sound of the name. And the Lumbee are not the only community whose names were quietly written down. There is an older, more scattered group whose surnames reach back even further, the Melungeon Corps names. In the mountains of Appalachia lived a people history could not classify, the Melungeons. A tri-racial community of native European and African ancestry, pushed to the ridges and written out of the categories that the law recognized. And yet, precisely because officials kept trying to classify them, their surnames were recorded again and again. Genealogists have identified a set of core Melungeon family names. The two most common are Collins and Gibson. Alongside them, Goins, Bunch, Mullins, Moore, Bowling, Williams. Here is where it gets genuinely surprising. The historian Paul Heinegg traced the core Gibson and Collins families back to Louisa County, Virginia in the early 1700s. And his research documents the family histories of more than 80% of the free families of color counted in the first federal censuses. In other words, these are not vague claims. These are some of the best documented mixed ancestry families in early American history. And you can watch the classification shift right there on the page. The same family, traced across the census decades, might be marked white in one count, free person of color in the next, mulatto in the one after that, the race changing while the surname stayed exactly the same. That instability is not a mistake in the records. It is the record telling you the truth. These were people the categories could not hold. The surname is the one fixed thing you can follow through all of it. So if your family carries a Collins or a Gibson line out of Appalachia, you are not looking at a rumor. You are looking at a name that professional genealogists have followed, on paper, for 300 years. What that name means for you specifically still has to be proven, but the trail is unusually real. And those Appalachian names connect to something bigger than one region. The Tidewater Trail and the Freedmen follow the oldest of these surnames back far enough, and they converge on the same place, the Virginia Tidewater, in the 1600s. Researchers have found that the Melungeons of Appalachia, the Lumbee of the Carolinas, and the Redbones of Louisiana all share free, mixed ancestors who appear in Virginia's earliest records, some as far back as the 1630s, and a cluster of surnames travels with them across all three communities: Oxendine, Gibson, Goins, Harris, Brooks, Johnson, Driggers. If you have deep southern roots and one of those names keeps appearing in your tree, you may be looking at a single free family that's scattered across the South over 4 centuries. There is one more group of surnames most lists never mention, and it matters. When the Dawes Rolls were made, the people who had been enslaved by the 5 tribes, and in many cases were also related to them by blood, were written onto separate freedmen rolls. Their descendants carry a documented tie to those nations that is every bit as real as the ones on the main rolls. The Cherokee freedmen are the clearest case. After the Civil War, an 1866 treaty granted the people the Cherokee had enslaved full citizenship in the nation, and their descendants were enrolled on the Dawes freedmen rolls. Then, generations later, the Cherokee Nation moved to remove them until in 2017, a federal court ruled that the treaty still held and their citizenship stood. Names on a roll, contested for a century and a half, and still standing. If your family carries one of those freedmen surnames, your documented tie to a native nation may be stronger than that of people who only ever had a story. So, that is the list. Around 20 names across 4 documented communities. But a name in a ledger is only half the story. To see the other half, look at the man we started with. What John Ross proves. Come back to John Ross for a moment, because his life is the whole lesson in one person. A Scottish surname, 1/8 Cherokee by blood, and yet the undisputed leader of the Cherokee Nation, because being Cherokee was never about the sound of his name or the fraction in his veins. It was about his family being part of that nation and written into its record as such. Now flip it around, because this is the part that should stop you. There were people in Ross's own time with far more native blood than he had, whose families were never enrolled, never written down, and who, in the eyes of the record, simply do not exist as native at all. That is the double edge of every surname on this list. The name can point you to a documented ancestor, but the document only ever captured some of the people, which raises the question that the viral lists never ask, and that you have to face if you are serious. What happened to the families the records were built to leave out? The lists that were built to erase? Because some of these surname lists were not made to help you find your ancestry. They were made to destroy it. In 1924, Virginia passed the Racial Integrity Act, and a registrar named Walter Plecker set out to enforce it. Plecker compiled lists of surnames, many of the exact tri-racial family names we just went through, and used them to reclassify native and mixed families as simply colored. On paper, with a stroke of a pen, he tried to erase entire native communities out of existence, because a people with no record is a people with no rights, and he went further than paperwork. Plecker told Virginia's own native communities, the Monacan, the Rappahannock, the Chickahominy, to their faces that they no longer existed, that there were no real Indians left in the state, only people of color pretending to be something they were not. He ordered clerks and midwives to change how their children's births were recorded. Historians now call what he did a paper genocide, and it worked well enough that several of those Virginia tribes did not win federal recognition until the 2010s, nearly a century later, still digging themselves out of one man's filing cabinet. And here is the dark irony that runs underneath this entire video. The records built to erase these families are now the records that prove they were here. Plecker's lists, meant as a weapon, are today read as evidence. The paper trail he created to deny these people their identity is the same trail their descendants follow to recover it. So a surname on one of these lists can mean two opposite things at once. It can mean a documented native ancestor, or it can mean a family that was cataloged so it could be denied. Sometimes it means both, and you can't tell which from the name alone, only from the records behind it. Which brings us to the only thing on this list that actually settles anything. At this point, it would be easy to say, fine, just check whether your surname is on the list and you have your answer. But that is exactly the trap, and it is the same trap as the viral videos, only dressed up smarter. Because the surname was never the proof. Everyone in Robeson County named Locklear is not automatically Lumbee. Every Collins out of Appalachia is not automatically Melungeon. The name only ever did one job. It told you which ledger to open. The proof is something else entirely. Tracing your specific line, parent by parent, back to a specific documented person in that ledger. That is the work the lists let you skip. And skipping it is why so many family Cherokee stories fall apart the moment anyone opens an actual record. The name gave people permission to stop looking, right at the point where the real search begins. That is the honest heart of it. The viral list sells you a finish line. The records offer you a starting line. One of them feels better in the moment. Only one of them can ever actually tell you who your people were. So here is what checking actually means. The part worth staying for. If you want a real answer instead of a comforting one, here is the order that works. First, build your tree backward with the ordinary records, census, birth, marriage, death, until you reach an ancestor born in the 1800s. You cannot leap to a tribe. You have to walk there. Second, if that line heads toward the 5 tribes, search the Dawes Rolls directly. They are free, indexed, and public through the National Archives and the Oklahoma Historical Society. Search the Guion Miller Roll too for Eastern Cherokee lines. You are looking for your specific ancestor by name, with the family around them matching your tree. To make that concrete, say your grandmother was a Collins from East Tennessee, and the family always said Cherokee. You would trace the Collins line back through the census, the 1850s, the 1840s, watching where they lived and how each census taker marked their race, which may well change from one decade to the next. If that line reaches the documented Melungeon Collins families of Hawkins County, Heinegg has very likely already mapped it. And the honest answer might turn out to be triracial free ancestry, not Cherokee at all. That is not a failure. That is a truer, older, and frankly more interesting story than the one you were handed. Third, if your line runs through the free triracial families, the Collins, Gibson, Goins names go straight to Paul Heinegg's documented genealogies, which have already traced many of those families for you. Fourth, check the base roll of the specific tribe you think you connect to. Each nation keeps its own. And only then, fifth, use a DNA test as a supplement, never as the proof. As we covered last time, a test can suggest broadly indigenous American ancestry, but it cannot name your tribe, And it cannot make you a citizen. It supports the paper trail. It never replaces it. Do that, and you will end up in one of two honest places: a documented ancestor with a name and a roll number, or the knowledge that the story, however lovingly told, does not hold. Both of those are worth far more than a viral list. So what is a surname, really, in all of this? It is not a verdict. It is an invitation. A name like Locklear or Collins or Ross is a door with a question written on it. Not "you are native," but "someone in this family may have been written down. Go and find out." And the honest truth is that the record will never be complete. For every ancestor who made it onto a roll, there were others who hid from the census taker, who were pushed into the wrong racial box, who avoided the government on purpose because being counted had never once been safe. Those people are real, and they are gone from the paper, and no surname will ever recover them. That is the quiet thing these lists can never give you. A name can lead you to the ancestors who were written down. It cannot give you back the ones the record was built to lose. What you can do is follow the trail that does exist, honestly, all the way to its end, and let the door that opens, open, and the one that stays shut, stay shut. If this is the mirror image of a story you have heard, you already know the companion to it. Watch what happens when millions of American families were certain they had a Cherokee grandmother, and what the DNA and the records actually found. It is the same question from the other side. And if one of these surnames is in your family tree, tell us which one and what you were always told about where it came from. We read every one,